Hello, world. Please enjoy the way that I look because it's incredibly telling for this Mars-Pluto square that we are in, and it shows you where I'm at in my life and my journey. I feel like a dead ghost right now, not because I am actually, but because I think that the decision we're actually needing to make at this Mars-Pluto square that's perfecting tomorrow um, is like pulling all of our remnants from the past, all of the ways we have made decisions in the past, and like forcing it into the present moment. And I know I am lagging right now. This last quarter square has not perfected yet, and it perfects tomorrow. But this is interesting astro knowledge, okay? Right before a aspect, especially I would say the squares, whether it's first quarter or last quarter, but right before that square passes either exactly at 90 degrees or after, or exactly at 270 degrees or after. The 270 is the one we're at right now. That period up until the exact aspect goes exact is like it is difficult. It is difficult because there's so much that you want to backslide. You don't actually want to make this decision. It's a very difficult decision. For some reason, I'll go into more specifically why this one is difficult, but like a last quarter and first quarter square are very difficult because there is a equal desire kind of to slide into the past as well as to slide into the future and to make the decision that brings us into a future which we have much less information about on both ends, either first or last quarter square. So I have been feeling this so deeply, despite all of the knowledge that I know, and despite me knowing the decision that I need to make. I'll probably have made the decision in the next like day if you're watching this. But anyway, my point here is like I feel like I am at war internally, and I feel like my body and my physical experience is kind of mimicking that. Now, of course, my moon is opposite this Mars right now. It's at like 3 degrees of Taurus. And so I do think there's like a knife that's I'm having a little bit of a battle with. Um, all that said, okay, astrology really should be a little bit more uplifting and encouraging so that you don't have to go into battle really in the same way that I am. Of course, my South Node is in Aries, and so maybe I'm just used to the wounds of war and the pains of war, but actually, that's a really important theme that I'll use to segue into this topic. Um, and in this video, you'll see why in a minute. Basically, that Aries energy has a there's a big signature of that Aries energy in the seeding chart for this current last quarter square. I'll bring up that chart. I'll show you what I think and I mean about it, and then I'll bring up the chart for right now and I'll talk about like why this decision is coming up so strongly right now. And then I'll also bring up the chart where Mars Pluto make their next conjunction later in January of 2026. So why don't we just hop into it, okay? As I'm pulling up this chart, I want to know if you're also feeling the wounds of war in your personal life and in your life. And I realize as I'm saying that again for the fourth time, how gross it is because we've been at war as a society probably for much longer than Western media has made it very abundantly clear that we are, especially social media. But that's not a topic I can go into very deeply right now. Oh, this is not what I want to share. This is this big document I told you that I wrote. Um, if you want this, let me know. I can post it somewhere. But I wanted to share Luna. I use Luna, which is a astrology software online. Not paid to tell you that, but I like it. I've liked it a lot. Okay, Julian, what's happening, girl? Let's get this up. Whoa, my ghost brain is not being very quick. Okay, here. Um, as I said, here's the first chart that I want to talk about. So, in very Uranus and Gemini style, I detached my microphone from its stand, and so now I don't know how to put it back together because it kind of broke, and it's very difficult to rest it because of this wire. So, I'm going to very gently rest it and then hope that all goes well. I think it will, but if you have any ideas on how to repurpose a mic stand, let me know. And if anyone wants to edit my videos, also let me know. I can't, yeah, please talk to me. Okay. All right. Here's the most important part. In astrology, if you like astrology because you have a birth chart. A birth chart is the original seeding moment of your life. And that doesn't mean you stay static, obviously. And we see the dynamism through the transits that happen throughout your life. But everything has a birth chart. Everything is seeded with something. And that's why astrology is powerful because we are seeded with a specific, I use the term like fractal pattern that whether we're very conscious of it or we're not conscious of it at all, it's going to play out. And that's where we can grow our self-awareness. Okay. So this same square that we're stepping into tomorrow actually has a birth chart too. And there's a couple different layers. Obviously, the chart itself is a birth chart, and that's what we use to look at it. And I'll pull up that chart next. That'll be for September 24th. It'll be for tomorrow. But because we exist in a very cyclic time, well, a cyclic world, rather, I always look at the seed charts. So a square is really, this third quarter square is like 3/4 of the way through the entire relationship between these two planets. Okay. So to know where it started, we go back to the last time that Mars and Pluto made a conjunction to each other, which was February 13th of 2024. So off the bat, think back to February 13th of 2024 and what you were doing, what you were up to. And specifically, we'll start with Mars. Okay. Mars is about right here, right now, what your body is doing. Okay. Mars is about action. I heard Adam Ellenbaugh say this yesterday. Mars is about where you're splitting something in two, which I thought was really brilliant. Right. When you take an action, you are not doing another action and you are also like claiming a timeline, right? You're not existing in possibility anymore when you act. So for that reason, I think, right, Mars can be very painful. Mars can be very aggressive and assertive. It doesn't have to be, but it is very aggressive and assertive. It has a point. It has a literal point. Okay? Haha. This is a point, right? It has a point. And then the point is to go somewhere to do something with this in Mars. So, but like, where's your natal Mars? This is a really good time to consider your own Mars energy and what your point is. Okay. So, like, my Mars is in Gemini. Are you surprised? So often it's my words and my brain that, like, they have a point to make. And that's where a lot of my energy, a lot of my life force energy moves through. Okay. And that's Pluto. Life force energy actually is Pluto. So the phasal relationship between Mars and Pluto is probably one of the most interesting and important phasal relationships between any two planets because Mars is the first expression of the Pluto desire. Pluto is the bottom line desire. You can't get any deeper than Pluto in astrology. This is specifically evolutionary astrology. And so, depending on how Mars and Pluto are placed, let's say in your chart, what's their phasal relationship to each other, that will show you how your own personal dynamic with moving your vital life force energy through your actions, how that plays out in your life. Okay. And on its own, Mars, Pluto is really not about values just yet. Okay. You could say that, like, aligning your actions with your deep desire, you could call that a value. But, and I guess to a certain extent it is, but Mars, Pluto is really not about any type of thought, any type of system or structure that you're trying to be morally bound by. And I think when it comes to a value system, there is a little bit of that. But if you see here, Venus was co-present um, at the last Mars-Pluto conjunction within a 5-degree orb, which immediately to me says that this seeding time that has set us up for this square that's happening tomorrow, the seeding time is absolutely about our values and absolutely about our morals. And when you put that together, how our morals and our values also impact our actions, then we can start to see how, like, we're trying to maybe realign our life back earlier in February 13th. But there's something very specific and technical here that I want to say to give this even more specificity, which is that we have a balsamic relationship happening between Venus and Mars and between Venus and Pluto. Okay, so what is a balsamic relationship? A balsamic relationship is the end of something. But it's interesting because we have the beginning, Mars, Pluto, we have the beginning of a new planetary relationship between our actions and our deep desires, beginning while Venus was still in a completion stage. So we were kind of jumping the gun a bit from February 13th. And it really is this jumping of the gun that has set us up for this whole cycle that we've been in relationships, right? Venus, Mars is very much so, a time of relationships. So this would have been a time where a relationship might have been ending. And in the sign of Aquarius, which I haven't said at all yet, this would have been a time where, like, a relationship, even to a community, was ending or to a group. Um, and it was totally regenerating itself. And kind of the whole point of this cycle, if we're just looking at Mars, Pluto, with the co-presence of Venus, the whole point of this cycle was to completely regenerate relationships, completely regenerate how your actions align with your values and how that ripples out into every other area of life. Okay, I keep saying relationships because I had a very strong change in relationships that happened around this time and that I've been tracking to the Venus Pluto cycle. I think relationships and people outside of us and our relationships to them are very clear indicators of, like, what we're dealing with, what we're working on, and ultimately what we're choosing with our own free will and consciousness. So let me move on a little bit here. The next thing I want to see very quickly just here is that Uranus, which is the ruler of Aquarius, was in Taurus. Um, and then it was ruled by Venus in Capricorn, the same Venus we were just talking about. Okay. This to me says that all of this change in our one-on-one or in our larger social relationships was kind of motivated by a deep need to completely revolutionize our self-worth, to completely push the boundaries, push the edges of how we value ourselves. This is Taurus, okay? That points to things like nervous system. It points to things like how you eat, how you charge for your time, how you just even value your inherent being and presence in the world. Okay. And that's really important to keep in mind throughout this cycle, because you'll see in a minute we have this really painful signature we're also dealing with, which I'll highlight in a moment here. But the next step I want to take is to go to the south node of the moon at this time. This is kind of like a classic EA reading, by the way. You do Pluto, its ruler, and then you do the nodes in their ruler. So we'll go to the south node, which is the past. And the past that's present at this time, at the time of this seeding, we have the south node in Libra, which is, okay, also ruled by Venus in Capricorn. So let me talk about Venus in Capricorn for a minute. Venus rules both Uranus and Taurus and south node in Libra at the time of this seed for this current decision that we're making right now, just to keep things kind of wrapped up so that you understand why it's relevant. Venus in Capricorn. Venus is about what we are open to, which means what we love, what we enjoy, and ultimately what we are as well. Okay, it's a Taurus function, which means what is who like what is your self-worth? What do you have that no one can take away from you? What are you constantly bearing fruit for? That's Taurus. And when Venus is in Capricorn, um, we have, and thus we are attracting very strong boundaries. Okay. Um, we are open to Capricorn things, which is like very strong clarity of the difference between two things. Capricorn is all about boundaries and the use of time and like frameworks. So we might have been really dealing with relationships and the things we love very in a potentially very restricted way at this time, or like trying to be very ethical and just about our relationships. And there's something about the past here. There's something about how we've been doing this for a really long time. We've been trying to be ethical and just about our relationships for a very long time. At this time, also, the ruler of Venus is Saturn in Pisces. And so it can also feel like these structures that are keeping us in relationships are also in this process of dissolving. The ruler of that Saturn being Neptune, and then really over this entire cycle, Saturn and Neptune have been getting closer and closer to each other, which has been like the dissolving of any type of framework or system that gives us a backbone. Okay. And so you see how kind of complicated this is. With the South Node in Libra, the whole like context and point of this time of the seeding of this cycle between, again, this is, we're talking about Mars and Pluto, which is about how we act on our desires. We're acting on our desire in order to complete relationship dynamics that are too restricted. Okay. And there's an element of us not knowing our worth in relationships or not understanding how intelligent we are on our own. Uranus is about trauma as much as it is about intelligence and like again self-worth and just recognizing your self-worth. And so if we look over here then to the North Node, this is where the pain signature comes in and why it's really it puts this Uranus in a different context also in Taurus. So North Node on its own, okay, is about what's the evolutionary purpose or direction. So like what are we evolving into as we're doing all of this work with the past? And with the North Node in Aries, this is about us individually. This is about who we are. It's about our actions. The same Mars and Pluto are ruling this North Node, okay? So there's something about our desires in like the renewing of how we are taking action to have our deepest desires met in community that somehow is really important to our own individuality, our own self-leadership in Aries, and how through this time we started that cycle in a process of developing who we are, of expanding and blossoming and moving and evolving into a sense of self that ultimately really knew what they wanted in the context of a community, I think, with Mars ruling Aquarius here, or Mars and Aquarius ruling the North Node. But of course, look at this. Okay. We have Chiron exactly conjunct the North Node, and the moon is also in this mix, even in a few hours once this goes exact. Once Mars gets to 0 45, basically, the moon is still in Aries. Excuse me. But imagine this whole day, February 13th of 2024, we were feeling such a connection, such a drive to the person that we were becoming, and that, like, and yet it was probably one of the most painful, like this could be like physical pain, emotional pain that's derived from the ending of a relationship to a community. Okay. Um, I don't know how else to put it. This was so painful. And this also means that this whole cycle that we are in now sits with the ultimate evolutionary desire to move towards pain. Now, the way that I'm reading this is basically Chiron is about sensitivity. ultimately. And it is also about healing. Because you're so sensitive, you need to learn how to heal yourself. There's a lot out there on Chiron. Go figure out what myth works best for you. But I tend to work with a healed healer myth. And with the co-presence, it's not a co-presence, with the presence of Uranus also in Taurus and this trauma or the intelligence of our individuality, of our person that we already have within us, it kind of speaks to needing to be so sensitive and also like almost like leading ourselves into pain, leading ourselves into decisions we're making for ourselves that end up being very painful in the context of getting what we want. It's almost like we've been in a cycle where every time we've gotten what we've wanted, it's been so painful, or somehow there's pain involved in getting what we want. And I think that that's specifically relational. Like there's some relational shift, some relational presence that has been present for a really long time, right? This Libra South node is about the past that's present right now. And so there's some, you could call it karmic, I don't really care, but there's something that needed to be worked with. And it had to do with how we value ourselves. And also, like, we've just been learning through a lot of pain. I know in this time, I was several months into like having chronic pain for like chronic physical pain for the first time. And over this time, I did have a very important relationship blow up that, inadvertently or directly also blew up my relationship to a specific community. And that's why I think I speak to this so strongly the way I do. But, think about this in your own life, where your self-worth has been expanding, but potentially because of a lot of pain that you have directed yourself into, um, maybe catalyzed by a relationship that really was something you wanted, but something that seemed to lead you into more and more pain and sensitivity. So, with all of that said, if we go to where we are tomorrow, I just want to reiterate this seed chart is still in effect. Okay. So, this seed chart is still the intention of what's going on right now, what's going on at the last quarter square tomorrow. But there's a few differences in the outer planets I want to mention right now, which I think speak to the fact that we've really come a long way in terms of growing from whatever this situation was, specifically through our own valuing ourselves and also, returning to right relationship with other people. So, um, okay, Pluto's obviously still in Aquarius. It's going to be in Aquarius for the next 20 years, but Pluto's now in this grand trine situation. Literally on this day, it's still in a grand trine, which means we're having a lot of opportunity. Even though we have to make a hard decision, it's in a place of a lot of opportunity where, we didn't really have that much opportunity socially last time, when this. So I think we've done a lot of work to bring ourselves into more potentialities. Okay. And I think that that has to do with Uranus in Gemini, right? Since this time, Uranus has shifted out of Taurus and into Gemini, which means we're no longer really struggling with self-worth in the same way or having to like revolutionize our nervous systems so that we can hold more bandwidth for self-worth. Right now, we're revolutionizing revolutionizing our minds in Gemini. We're revolutionizing our data and our communications and how we think and how we talk and really finding the edge of communication so that we can, you know, liberate that deep desire, which ultimately is still social, right? This desire in Aquarius with Pluto and Aquarius is ultimately a social desire. And with that trine to all of the air signs now, Libra, Gemini, Aquarius, this is every possible type of relationship to one person, to a group of people, to your neighborhood. Okay, this is like so many, this is a big opportunity we have to really step into something um, that wasn't present at the seed chart, right? All of this was not there. So I do think we have made strides collectively and individually in revolutionizing our self-worth, um, specifically. So this point. And of course, okay, the nodes are no longer in Aries Libra. So we're no longer like dealing with an axis of relationship anymore to be dealing with. And I didn't say this, but at the seed chart, this Mars Venus conjunction, balsamic conjunction was ruling the nodes. Okay. This was like, this situation was so like very fated, I could say. Like it was a very destined time here to be working on relationships. Um, anyway, let's go back here. So the difference again this time is that we have the nodes in Pisces, Virgo, okay? And with the South Node in Virgo, we have a practice. So it's no longer a relationship we're dealing with from the past, but instead it's a practice and it's a way we give our attention outside to ourselves, like from ourselves. I see Virgo as everything about attention. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with. We're still having a social desire that we want to meet with Pluto and Aquarius. That social desire is far more communicative now with Uranus in Gemini ruling it. If we follow that rulership right now, Mercury ruling Uranus and Gemini in Libra is all about one-on-one communications and how these one-on-one communications are helping us to revolutionize our mind. Okay. And, this is a broken record by this point, but Venus is co-ruling essentially because there's a mutual reception between Mercury in Libra and Venus in Virgo. So there's still a relational signature at the time of this decision that we're making tomorrow or September 24th. But it's much more about an intimate encounter of like someone putting their attention on you and then you giving someone else your attention too. So, and then having a mutual exchange about that. There's a little bit less drama right now relationally, I would say, especially like external to your inner self. There's a little bit less relational drama that's very active just because there's so much harmony and opportunity right now. But of course, um, well, okay, before I go on, the North Node is in Pisces. Okay. So we're like ultimately far more forgiving right now. We're far less in a battle mode. Um, and like wanting to make decisions only for our specific own selves. This is a far greater faith that we're holding at this time. And we see Saturn's right there, pretty close within 10 degrees. And so there is still an element of like restriction. There's an element of needing to commit to something. But what the commitment is to limitlessness and to peace and to, you know, interesting because the ruler, Neptune, is in Aries. And so there is that like my personal truth is very important here, but it's like a capital T truth that can't be named. And yet in Aries, I think we are trying to name it. But then that ultimately takes us back to Mars because Mars rules Neptune and Aries. And so then we can talk about this Mars Pluto square. Okay. Now, the first thing I want to say is that pretty much at the exact point of this square, the moon will be present with Mars, which right off the bat means we're going to be feeling this pretty seriously, pretty specifically. And this is happening very early in the morning, Pacific time. So translate for wherever you are in the world, but I don't know, probably that whole day, even well into the later morning and the whole day, we're going to be feeling this. But Mars in Scorpio is like, wow. It cuts very deep. It cuts very, very deep. And it wants to act because it can trust in something and also because it wants to get something. Okay, these are kind of like the two sides of Scorpio that get cut in half when Mars goes there. Scorpio is again ruled by Pluto, this ultimate desire. But Scorpio is also ultimate trust. And that's why Scorpio is so sensitive because if you get betrayed, then you are calling into question your trust and you're experiencing betrayal. And these can be on such deep, cutting levels, sexually, financially, psychically, of course. These areas of life that determine, in a sense, whether or not we are connected, whether or not we are completely alone sitting in hell or we are absolutely connected, okay? Scorpio, I always think about it, comes right before Sagittarius. Scorpio is like where all your beliefs are tested, where all of your goodwill is tested. And then if you can make it out of Scorpio, then you land in Sagittarius and you're like, okay, wow, I've been through it. I have faith, right? But yeah, we're in Scorpio. This last quarter square is happening, and the moon is right there. And Mars in Scorpio is naturally taking action on something occult, taboo, sexual, financial, something that's uncomfortable. Something also very strategic on the positive side of this. We need to be almost quiet until we absolutely know, which can kind of then feed into what I was saying about all this time before the exact square happens can be so hard because we haven't through time jumped over that hurdle yet to say, okay, yeah, I'm making the decision. That's it. It's done. Now let me live through what's going to come after I've made this decision. I think we don't know who this person is. I don't think we know who that looks like for ourselves. I can make a guess here, okay, which is that, this is someone who trusts themselves implicitly, who wants to be in a community, is actually derived a lot of this decision making from the desire to be in a community because Pluto's ruling this. Um, Probably because of an opportunity too. There's a social opportunity. Um, and yet, this Mars in Scorpio with the moon there needs a type of security to make a decision. It needs to know it's going to be okay and yet completely know it needs to take a risk. And so the knowing that it's going to be okay comes from something else entirely. It's why it's hard. It's why it's really hard. But that's why on the other side of this, we become someone who is testing their faith, who is walking their walk. Okay. Um, this last quarter square is the square where you break away from the past. Um, in contrast to the first quarter square is kind of like emerging into the world and asserting your existence for the first time. But by the time of the third quarter square, we've already been in the world quite a bit, okay? And we're realizing it's too small for us. And so the decision that we make at a third quarter square is to find a bigger pond, if you will. Um, any third quarter square has that signature. And I guess the hard thing is we just don't, we're not going to feel like we've like made it probably for a while, probably not until at least January 27th when they make a new conjunction to each other, but probably also not for a while after that, if I'm being very honest, because of this Saturn Neptune conjunction. But okay, let me go into this because if we think about this last quarter square, we're already feeling like there's something else possible. What am I doing here? Oh, that's the wrong chart. This last quarter square, we already feel like something else is possible. Okay, and so we're already tuning into this potentiality, this new conjunction. But the reality is, we're still working through this one, which has to do with making decisions that have caused us pain. But we are the ones that have made the decision the whole time. We can't really blame anyone else for that. But still, if we think more into the future about who it is that we are becoming, I think looking at this chart of the upcoming conjunction is very interesting because ultimately this is where it ends. This cycle is where the last cycle ends. Okay, it's kind of like going from new moon to new moon. Um, so there's a lot of differences, a lot of similarities between this chart and the last conjunction chart. Now, I'll go through the similarities first, which I find are very interesting. Now, of course, it's happening in Aquarius again, the Mars-Pluto square. But the ruler of Aquarius this time is back in Taurus. Uranus is back in Taurus. And so we're starting another cycle, very simply here, of getting what we want, Mars and Pluto, um, through a community and through that community's ability to push our own intelligence, to push our experiences to change how we value ourselves. We're kind of back in that paradigm a little bit. Um, and so there is still work to do on our physical body, on our value in the world and what we are worth and how that fits into another community. At this time, the ruler of Taurus is also in Aquarius. And so we have an interesting mutual reception happening where what we are open to is that new idea or community, and what we are revolutionizing is what we are open to, if you see what I mean. So there's a lot more symbiosis here just in this signature itself, okay? Um, I just wanted to point that out. And happening on a waxing moon, very nice. Anyway, and we can see like North Node still in Pisces. There's no Chiron here. You know, it isn't a semi-square to Chiron, but I'm not even going to read into that. Like, okay, do you see how already this is feeling a lot better? The next thing I want to point out, and this is not going in the EA style, but I want to point out the fact that Mars is like the last planet to cross Pluto at this time, which very importantly for the context of relationships means that Venus has already passed her conjunction to Mars, which means that our relationships and our relationships to ourselves, they're already in a new phase. Like we've already established something in a relationship by the time we reestablish what our personal desires are, which means we're not dragging a relationship through the mud in the same way we were in the last cycle. In fact, this is so much about us and our individuality. The sun is right there, still pretty conjunct at this time, still past already, but to me, this is so much more about the renewal of a community and taking action in community to revolutionize our worth rather than it being about like the death of a relationship within a community. Okay. Like, you know, things were already also pretty past Pluto at this point, but Venus was not, and that's really important. Um, okay, so if we go to the South Node, again, it's still in Virgo, and so there's still this thing we're dealing with of a practice where our attention's going what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And that's again ruled by Mercury in Aquarius, which then brings us back to the Venus-Uranus mutual reception, which is kind of cool. So even the past that we are dealing with is very present in that same kind of community energy that we are dealing with at this time. So do you see even more symbiosis here? North Node in Pisces is ruled by Neptune, also in Pisces still. I'm sorry, also in Aries again. So there is still a personal truth that we are working towards. But again, it's ruled by this Mars-Pluto conjunction, of course, in Aquarius. All these things I already spoke about. There's just a nicer, easy way into community at this time that I don't think we're dealing with in as harsh and painful and in as isolating of a way as I think we have been having to deal with. Um, so yeah, let me see. Was there other stuff I wanted to say at this time? It's interesting that we have Saturn and Uranus back in their older signs at this point. So, and that's going to carry us through the next like 2.5 years with the cycle. But, you know, a month after this conjunction, Saturn's going to pass Neptune, and we're going to be building out an entirely new reality from that point on. And so, whatever this situation of relationships in community and the desire to meet others in community, right? There's a through line here of there being like our deepest desires being very social in nature, whether that ends up being through one-on-one relationships or ends up being in larger group scenarios, kind of depends on your chart. But I do think it's showing up that way for everyone. I just wanted to checking out these squares really quick. That's not too bad. And that's also not too bad. It's really, honestly, this next cycle we're stepping into is a testament of how much work we've been doing since this cycle, since 2024's cycle that began. And I genuinely think this looks like a ton of opportunities starting early January, but we need to make this difficult decision now in order to get there. So I'm hoping this is all making sense to you. There's several other pieces and dates here. I'll just talk about one that I love talking about, which is October 4th. I think next month we're going to be feeling even more renewed because Venus will cross the South Node and we'll finally bring ourselves into the present moment with what we are open to. We'll close out a big chapter of the past that I do think right now we still feel like we're lagging a little bit in terms of still being open to maybe a relationship, even just in energy, even just the energetics of um, having someone else put their attention on us, but it's in the past, right? It's completing itself. And that can kind of be a residual feeling that keeps us from feeling ready and excited to make this decision, this third quarter square Mars Pluto decision. Um, but I do think that we've come a really long way to even be able to make this decision. I think it's been through the grace of gods. I don't think it's anything we've done on our own. But I also think it's us developing a relationship, but it's not a relationship to like other people. It's developing a relationship to God, to the universe, to others, to the humanity and total respect of others. Okay. So even though we don't have a super, I guess we do have a very strong Aries Libra axis here because of Sun, Neptune, and all these other planets in Neptune, and then of course Chiron. Anyway, but my point here is oppositions are so important as lessons to learn about how you are just as big as someone else. But you need to trust when it's time for you to step in versus when it's time for you to step out. And this is going to be an intuitive moment to moment thing. And if you're not tuned in to what's true for you at every single moment, you're not going to be able to know when it's time to step in and step out. And you'll reach these huge edges where you have to then spend like several years totally secluded or several years totally losing yourself to a relationship or a social situation. And there's no shade to that, man. I've been going through that for the first 30 years of this life that I'm living, but I'm finally coming into, I think, a refinement of knowing how to listen to myself and know when to step in, when to step out. Um, and that's just, it's a huge function of these times. That's not necessarily the lesson of a square, but I think because Mars Pluto is very relational at its core, it's very sexual too, okay? Like Mars Pluto is that drive, that like deepest drive to create, whether that's another being or art or just the life that you truly want. So, so visceral. I think that's most of what I wanted to say about this Mars Pluto square. And I I have to make a decision, okay? And I'm scared as heck. I'm really scared. I can't like sit here and pretend that because I know all the astrology, it makes it any easier. It really doesn't. And I think there's a lot of humanity in that that I really like and appreciate. I mean, you can see like I just there's this like literally this third quarter square is interesting also because this is not it. You know this the current paradigm that you're in is needs to be transcended in a way. And so there's just this like crawling out of your skin type of feeling if you're like me and you haven't necessarily learned how to completely energetically hold the potentialities and have the bravery to step into it. Um, right? But I do think that's the skill that we're sharpening. Scorpio is very, very sharp. It wants us to sharpen these skills. And so, yeah, we can be tough on ourselves, like I'm being on myself right now, but I have a lot of trust and there's just so much that comes up. So I know there's something brave that every one of us is about to do, and I want to validate that and encourage it in myself. It is hard. Oh my God, it is hard. I haven't made the decision yet, and I don't know why I am stumbling so much. Um, but yeah, this is the time. This is the time to make the decision. Um, and like jump the hurdle. So that's what I have. I hope it's been helpful. Very powerful, interesting times. I have a few readings available this week if anyone wants to go through your chart with me. And otherwise, thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure. And until the next one, goodbye for now.